This project was made possible with support from Dice Financial, looking forward to your future. First Dakota National Bank, experience the difference. The Bainan family, in memory of Vicki Bainan Copley. Poet Biorefining. Knowledge Tree Films. And all supporters of the Prehistoric Indian Village through donations and volunteering.
The vast Midwestern plains of North America stretch for 2,000 miles. The size is almost beyond imagination. The landscape is diverse. Vast plains, farmland, rolling hills, mountains, lakes, and rivers. Millions live here in big cities and small towns. Thousands of years ago, grasslands stretched across the horizon, and millions of bison called the plains home. Native Americans were here also, as they have been for many thousands of years. There's evidence of humans hunting mammoths as long as 13,000 years ago. There is an entire history of native tribes and cultures who once occupied the North American continent. Most of it has been lost. It's very rare that we find a site so preserved as this one. This is the Prehistoric Indian Village Museum, located in the modern-day city of Mitchell, South Dakota. Mitchell was founded in 1883 as the town of Firesteel. What many people don't know is that a settlement was located here 1,200 years ago. It was also, as one can think of Mitchell, a village on the river, and its inhabitants led full lives here for many generations. The Prehistoric Indian Village is a stunningly preserved site where archaeologists are uncovering artifacts and evidence of how people lived here many hundreds of years ago. Their houses, their hunting, the crops they grew, the things they made, and their trade routes. We know they were the ancestors of the Mandan tribe, now living in North Dakota.
My name is Tamara St. John, and I'm from the Sisseton-Wahpeton Oyate, or the formerly known as the Sisseton-Wahpeton Sioux tribe. We are a part of the Dakota Nation, and we are one of the 7 council fires of the Great Sioux Nation. To me, it's exciting. You know, and because I think we all wonder about the world before us, especially as Indigenous people, and knowing, you know, maybe just a glimpse of who was here, what did they eat, what did they use. What I found when I got here was an incredible resource, and it's an incredible site that shares the very history that I think I try to share regularly. And I don't see many places like this, where the archaeology, and then you even have the connection to Indigenous nations now. And, you know, that's all the story that we're trying to tell that often doesn't get told. So this place was just fantastic. So I found, I think, an incredible site, an incredible historic site, and I found Cindy.
My name is Cynthia Gregg. I am the Executive Director of the Prehistoric Indian Village in Mitchell, South Dakota, and that's where we are. This has been sort of a dream for me. As a high school student, I audited college courses in anthropology and cultural anthropology, and archaeology has always been a fascination of mine. So this was just a perfect fit, I think. Even though I had absolutely no background in fundraising or writing grants, it turns out that just might be my superpower.
One of Cynthia's main areas of interest is to show museum visitors the richness of history found here, but in a human context.
My mantra, if you will, has always been that Native American history does not begin in 1492, that we are teaching people the story of the first people. We are sharing not only their story, but how they lived, what they did, and just how amazing they were, how sophisticated they were, how perfectly adapted to this environment. And they weren't much different than we are today. They liked beautiful objects, they liked music, they certainly liked good food. They had children, and the children had toys. They played games. They weren't any different than we are today.
Yeah, I'm a emeritus professor from Augustana University. My name is Adrian Hannes, and my affiliation with the Mitchell site goes back to 1983. I'm the director of the archaeology program here.
In 1983, Dr. Adrian Hannes joined us. He was the chair of the anthropology and art department at Augustana University, and he joined us as the lead investigator of the site. And he realized that excavating outdoors was not very practical for what we were trying to do here.
The goal is to find a way to protect the site, have resources on hand to assist researchers, and a space for the public to view the excavation site, archaeological activities, and exhibitions, all in a protected atmosphere. But first, it had to be designed. Then, it had to be built.
And in 1990, he came up with the thought of building a structure such as our Archeodome. And it took many, many years to raise the funds to do this. The building was finally completed in 1999. During that time, they had to excavate for the big columns that are in the building, in the Arcadome. And in those excavations, they pulled out 1.5 million artifacts. This site is astonishingly rich in artifacts, and the U.S. Department of Interior says that the Prehistoric Indian Village is one of the most significant archaeological sites in the Northern Plains.
One of the things that had never happened prior to that, with all the village sites that have been explored out here in the Northern Plains, in South Dakota, North Dakota, is that archaeologists always focused on the living structures. In other words, they focused on the lodges. Nobody had ever focused on the space between those structures. And so it was our hypothesis that really we ought to, if we're going to try to investigate the site to a great extent, we should try to fix a structure up that we could enclose part of the site with, and then we could open a block area that would be between Earth Lodge structures. And so that's what we did.
I'm Professor Alan Outram, and I'm Professor of Archaeological Science at the University of Exeter, and I particularly specialise in the study of animal bones in the past. I think what we've managed to do here is, which hasn't been done previously, is understand the spatial relationships on these sites. And this dome allows us to do that, because you can't put a large area across between houses if it's subject to the South Dakota weather. The baking heat in the summer, the storms, the really cold weather, because it really would damage the site. But the dome allows us to open up this very large area and investigate right across it.
What we feel pretty confident is that the Arcadome is the only facility of its kind, not only in the nation, but potentially in the world. We have not seen any other facility that as a human site that is constructed over the site where research is carried on. This is the only archaeological site open to the public in the state of South Dakota. So the uniqueness of this facility really allows us to really concentrate on the contributions that this society made to our current society.
This is probably one of the most pristine villages that exist for this time period up here in the Northern Plains. The surface that you walk across right now today is a surface they left 1,000 years ago. This is the surface they lived on because in the grassroots is where the artifacts start. So that makes it really a very important site. And the site dates to about 1,000 years ago.
The people who once lived at this archaeological site show influence from the Mississippian culture.
And the Mississippian culture was an extensive group of diverse tribes and peoples that extended from Montana all the way across to the Great Lakes, down the river systems of the Missouri and Mississippi rivers, all the way to the Gulf Coast, across Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, and parts of Florida. The epicenter of the Mississippian culture was a big city called Cahokia. Cahokia, 1,000 years ago, was the largest city in North America that we know of.
This village was connected by trade routes to other settlements, including one of the largest documented settlements in North America at the time, Cahokia.
It was bigger than London was 1,000 years ago. And 1,000 years ago, Westminster Abbey was built in London, yet Cahokia was much, much bigger. So there was a great deal of trade going on. And all this trade means that our people had something everybody else wanted. And that something was what they were doing with the bison.
In the past, there were millions of bison on these plains, so they were a very, very common animal. And there are hundreds and hundreds, probably thousands of bison that were killed and eaten on this site. But actually, it would have made a tiny, tiny dent into the huge populations that existed in the past. So the majority of the meat eaten here probably was bison meat and the fat, and then of course the hides would have been used, everything would have been used. Hunting bison here was largely by bow and arrow. We have a lot of arrowheads here, but the very small ones, they're often no bigger than this, really quite tiny arrows, but we do find a very large number of them.
The bison was a walking hardware store for the Indians. The reason I've suggested for sure that there is some almost industrial complex here going on is that the numbers of bison that have been procured here and the fact that there was extensive activity in producing bone grease, which as a product could then be mixed with dried meat and produce something that today we call pemmican.
A very useful prairie food, but one which is also tradable long distance. During my PhD, I did a lot of work on how people exploited the fat from animals in the past. And fat was a much more important subject in the past. Now we denigrate it as a food that's bad for us, but in the past it was a massive source of calories that people really sought after, very deliberately.
They were processing the bison here, extracting bone grease, and the bone grease was a powerful trade item. Everybody wanted it for the manufacture of pemmican, to lubricate tools and weapons, to waterproof textiles. So it was really, really important for them.
We have, over the years, determined that there were at least 80 earth lodges, and there may have been some more here, but I mean 80 would be a total that you'd see over the occupation period of the site, which may have been 75 to 100 years. It would seem that the life expectancy of one of these lodges probably didn't, up in this northern clime, probably didn't exceed 12 to 15 years.
The museum itself has a reproduction or reconstruction of one of the 70 to 80 lodges that once sat on this site. It's a full-size reconstruction that visitors can walk through. Contrary to what many people think, they did not live in teepees. Teepees are a modern convenience. They lived in lodges that are not too unlike modern houses. No electricity or plumbing, but four walls and a roof over the head and all the conveniences of home.
So if we're going to define archaeology, it's perhaps first best to define what history is. So history is learning about the past from written documents. And archaeology is finding out about the past almost from everything else, from the material things they've left behind. And that means, of course, that archaeologists can penetrate before there were written documents. Each year we bring out largely a new group of field school students, but we often bring back a few that have done work previously, so that we've got some people with experience. So we've got one of our supervisors here is Hannah. She did her initial field school here. She came back and helped supervise just before COVID, and now she's come back out again. So whilst a lot of the students are different each year, we keep some people that have more experience, bring them out to help pass on their skills to the students before. And of course, Adrian and I form the continuity, the people that see every year of excavation.
So history tends to focus on literature and written word. Archaeology encompasses everything from the first humans, so hominids, up to the present day, and the physical materials, the footprint we leave on the earth, but also the objects we create, and the tools we build, the sort of animals we interact with. Everything is kind of encompassed within archaeology, which is a subset of anthropology in itself, which is the study of human and human culture. As a student, being here is just really interesting and fascinating to have the Arcadome as a site to dig in, because not only is it an archaeological site where we do practical excavation, it's also a tourist attraction and a heritage monument. So we get to experience being with the public and having them come ask questions, but we also get to do active post-ex work while literally digging stuff up and immediately washing it and bagging it and archiving it. So we get to experience the whole process, as well as feeding back to the public about what we dig in. So it's quite a unique site in terms of that.
The students are here because of a partnership between Dr. Alan Ultram and Dr. Adrian Hannes. Since 2004, students spend 1 month each summer working on the dig, cataloging what they find, and sometimes making exciting discoveries. For many, this is the first on-location work, and it's an amazing place to start their education out in the field. Try to imagine the way things were 1,200 years ago. It would be a place familiar and also very different. And that's what it's like for these archaeology students visiting South Dakota from Exeter, England.
I'm into the old West stuff and those types of films, so seeing all of this is really cool and definitely something that I didn't think I'd be doing when I've been out here.
Okay, so the overall experience for me is that South Dakota at least is extreme in the weather and the nature and just the overall, natural beauty of it. Just like looking around this field, you wouldn't find this in Exeter, so. And working in the village is very awe-inspiring in a sense, just being surrounded with all that history that's been waiting so long to be unearthed.
It's really interesting actually being able to put all the things we've learned into practice and kind of seeing things for real and trying to imagine what it was like back then for the people, whilst also kind of digging up in real time. So
it's something that I've not experienced before because this is my first archaeological dig, but the hole that we're digging, we've got a huge bison skull, and seeing that, and it's going to come out soon, it's amazing knowing that you're seeing something as well that no one has seen for, I think it's about 1,000 years. So it really is crazy.
Our filming crew was very fortunate to be here when an exciting discovery was made. The archaeology students unearthed the skull of a bison, a direct link to this location and its importance as a center for processing bison and the trade connected to that. Along with bison, another cornerstone of the livelihood of the people living here so long ago was an incredible adaptation of agriculture to the Dakota climate.
They were pioneering groups coming in, introducing a form of agriculture into the area, bringing with them corn, squash, beans, sunflowers. Crops that we grow here right across the landscape today were being begun to be grown in here 1,000 years ago.
Corn is an amazing plant. Most folks do not know where corn comes from. Many people think it does grow in the wild. It does not. Corn was first domesticated somewhere between 6,000 and 8,000 years ago in Mexico from a plant called teosinte. And from those early days of domestication, the use of corn traveled or spread to present-day Peru and to present-day southwestern United States. The people who settled in South Dakota 1,000 years ago were the very first to bring corn to this region. And it's not that they brought corn that's so amazing. What's so amazing is what they did to that corn. They were able to take a plant that was a tropical plant with a growing season of 120 days and adapt it to our growing season of just 75 to 80 days. Modern science hasn't really improved upon that at all. What's even more interesting is the corn that they were growing. It's unlike corn that we grow today. The corn that they were growing is about as long as my index finger. And so when you're talking about a village that has 200 to 400 people living in it, and corn is the main source of food for these people, we're not talking about mom's kitchen garden anymore. We're talking about a major agricultural operation going on, and that's exactly what was going on here at this village 1,000 years ago.
Today, with all the uses we have of corn, no one thinks about how it was a tiny plant that came from so far away.
But corn has many other uses today. It's used as a livestock feed, but I think one of the most important uses for corn today, and it's very important here in the Midwest, is as a fuel. Ethanol plants have been built around the state of South Dakota and are producing corn, ethanol, corn-based ethanol in huge numbers. A lot of it is shipped overseas today, but a lot of it is being used here in South Dakota and everywhere else in the United States. And that has become the major impetus for the spread of corn in agriculture. It is our most important crop.
When you look at the various crops that were developed here 1,000 years ago, which had propagated forward over thousands of years from the central valleys of Mexico, we want people to have a deep understanding of what previous cultures have contributed to our current society.
There are many more secrets to be uncovered here. The prehistoric Indian village is constantly growing with new discoveries and new ideas for exhibits.
And here we have a couple of examples of these trees which have absolutely no business growing in South Dakota out in the wild. They're called Kentucky coffee trees. In Canada, they're considered an endangered species. The trees that we found are certainly not 1,000 years old, but they are growing on rootstock that could very well be 1,000 years old. They are in the process, the area in which they are growing is in the process of becoming our newest exhibit, a living exhibit.
The museum, its staff, and its supporters all strive to live up to a very high standard. What we see here now shows the dedication, hard work, and cooperation of over 30 years.
We're very thankful for the support of the Bainans, the Thompsons, Kinsellas, and of course the city of Mitchell in order to preserve the national historic significance of the site.
The passion that people here have is matched only by their professional dedication to creating and maintaining the best museum experience.
I think that a good museum should spark wonder and amazement at whatever it is the visitor is looking at. It should ask questions and it should provide answers. For children, it should open their eyes to just the wonders of the world, the wonders of the arts, just the wonders of life in general. A good museum is a good memory. People remember it forever.
This project was made possible with support from Dice Financial, looking forward to your future. First Dakota National Bank, experience the difference. The Bainan family, in memory of Vicki Bainan Copley. Poet Biorefining. Knowledge Tree Films. And all supporters of the Prehistoric Indian Village through donations and volunteering.